And as I was considering what narrative or what story, what could we work through, really my mind and thoughts kept going back to the Exodus story. And the Exodus story is so central in the Old Testament. And really, I want to try to convince you this morning, at least in a part of this, that the Old Testament is really central in the New Testament. The Exodus story is really central in the New Testament as well. So that's what we will be considering. So you can go ahead and be finding the book of Exodus. And this will be a little bit different style than maybe some of you are accustomed to. Rather than a strict verse-by-verse look, we will be looking sort of at the story in general and making some points of reference through that. I have the opportunity to preach this week and then also next week. So I just want to warn you, we're not getting them out of Egypt this morning, okay? So they waited 400 years, you can wait a week, all right? So that's what we're going to do. Just to warn you, you will have to come back next week for us to get out of Egypt. So that's how it's going to work. Well, if you've never done this, you really owe it to yourself to go watch a 4-year-old soccer game. We call it soccer because there's really not an appropriate word other than perhaps chaos for what's going on the field. A couple of years ago, my daughter was playing soccer, and it was great fun to go out and watch them, and it looks like a little hive of hornets has been disturbed when that ball goes out, and they're just, no regard for positions, no regard for lines on the field, just see ball, get ball, right? And that's kind of how it works, and it's great fun for the parents, great fun for the kids. And as I was doing a little backyard coaching, and with my vast soccer experience, I taught my daughter a motto that I always found very helpful in sports. Motto goes like this: we didn't come to win, we came to dominate. We didn't come to win, we came to dominate. Served me well in sports throughout the years. I haven't done a lot of dominating in sports, but that's what we're after. Well, it didn't exactly catch on with the 4-year-old contingency, as most of the time they're either chasing the ball or looking for clovers on the field, or you know how that goes. When I come to the story of the Exodus, what we find is God didn't just come to win. He came to dominate. And that's exactly what he does in the story of the Exodus. And we make a mistake if we come to a story like the Exodus and we immediately jump to individual redemption. What's in this for me? If you come to the Exodus story with that mentality, you've missed the point already. You're on the wrong track. You're running the wrong way on the relay race here, all right? This is not a story about you. This is a story about God. It's a story about God making his name known, and it's a story about God dominating the competition for supremacy. That's exactly what the story is about. If you want a title for the sermon this morning, it's this: God wins. God wins. And if you want to adjust that based on our opening illustration here, you could say God dominates. He really does dominate. This is a strange story in reality. It may not seem strange to us, especially if you've grown up in a church culture, because you've kind of heard this story all of your life. But really, it's an interesting story when you step back and look at the details of it. You have this slave people who are in captivity and had actually gone to Egypt by their own doings to avoid the famine. And now, some 400 years later, things have changed and they are a slave people. And God takes this people and turns them into a great nation. He takes them and delivers them through these miraculous acts. And I think most of us would be familiar, at least, with the general framework of what's going on in the book of Exodus. I have to admit, earlier on, as a Christian, Exodus was one of those books that you start reading and you get about 2 chapters in, you're like, what is happening here? And it's mysterious and it's different. But the more you read and the more you look at this and the more you begin to understand what's going on and what's the big story that makes sense out of this little story, once you start to see that, this book has life to it. It comes alive. It jumps off the pages and it grabs us once we start seeing the significance of what is going on here. A few years ago, I did a series of sermons on people God killed in the Bible. Okay? Just go look that one up sometime. Interesting study. The people that God killed in the Bible, I actually got the idea from someone else, and I was working in the student ministry at Grace Community Church in California, and I said, what would be a good topic that we could take a little bit of time and work through, and that's what we landed on. And as I began to work through these different accounts, like the flood, and like Sodom and Gomorrah, and then you come to the Exodus story, and then a little while later you come to this story about God opening up the ground and swallowing people, and you come to a story like Uzzah and the ark. You come to all these stories, and it forces you to really begin to say, what are these really all about? Well, they're all about God and His holiness. They're all about God and His people and how they will conduct themselves. And as I was working through the Exodus story, I started looking at all the different places that the Exodus is mentioned in the Scriptures. You ever thought about that? All the places that the Exodus is mentioned. There's at least 10 particular psalms that use the Exodus motif to describe redemption. 10 particular ones, and there's numerous other allusions, but 10 that we can definitely say, yeah, he's talking about the Exodus. We read one of those a little while ago, Psalm 77. One writer even said this: some of the Psalms make it perfectly clear that originally this span of time, i.e. the period from the patriarchs, that's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, to the entry of the Promised Land up to Joshua, and this alone was regarded as the time of saving history proper. If the psalmist wished to sing of God as Redeemer, they naturally take the Exodus as their theme. That's a mouthful to say. If the psalmist wished to sing of God as Redeemer, they take the Exodus as their theme. They remember the Exodus, as we saw Asaph doing earlier. These events are recalled by a lot of the prophets: Amos, Micah, Hosea, Isaiah, Jeremiah. They all take the Exodus motif. This idea of the Exodus is center in their writings. And really, they leave us expecting something else, right? They leave us expecting, the Old Testament ends expecting something else. Some of the Old Testament writers would anticipate another Exodus that's coming, a new Exodus that would be coming. There's a lot of parallels from the life of Christ, even to be drawn with the Exodus and the Exodus idea. A few clear examples of this, and we really don't have opportunity to completely explore this morning, but maybe just to whet your appetite for this study a little bit. Pharaoh, of course, tries to kill the Hebrew children in the Old Testament, right? The Exodus. And in an ironic and really intentional display of providence, where do Mary and Joseph go when the decree is given to kill the babies? To Egypt, right? You guessed it. The ministry of Jesus, we see him withdraw to the desert for 40 days, similar to the 40 years of testing that Israel would have. And the temptations that Jesus endured are roughly parallel to the temptations that Israel failed in the wilderness. Jesus would get it right. He wouldn't give in to these temptations. And we see this motif, this idea of the Exodus really as sort of the undercurrent narrative, if you will. It's the story under the story of the New Testament. And we see this over and over and over again. We could go on and on and on about the Exodus and how significant it is. One of the major keys to getting this story right and thinking through this story properly is to understand that this isn't just a fairy tale. Okay? This is a story that happened in time and in space. It actually happened. To borrow a term from the sporting world, this was God's statement game. Okay? He made a statement with this. He made a statement with the Exodus and says, this is who I am. This is what I do. It's a decisive victory. He wins, and he wins big. He dominates the competition. So here's what we're going to do. Over this week and next week, I want to point out for you 8 ways that God demonstrates his glory in the Exodus. Okay? 8 ways God demonstrates his glory in the Exodus. And we will look, Lord willing, at 4 of these this morning, and then we'll have the opportunity next week to look at 4 more of these. Okay? 8 ways God demonstrates his glory. Number 1 is this: through his meticulous plan. Okay? Through his meticulous plan, or detailed plan. God is up to something on planet Earth, okay? God is up to something. He is accomplishing something with his words, with his works, with the way that he has interacted with humans in history. God is up to something. When I say the name Paul Harvey, most of you are immediately familiar with that voice. And I would do the voice for you if I could do the voice, but I can't, so I won't. Got to know your limitations, right? Paul Harvey had a famous segment that aired for years. It was called The Rest of the Story. That's right. And what Paul Harvey would do is he would pick some oddity from history, some story that had some little strange detail behind it, some supporting character that you never would have known about, some split-second decision that was made that could have really altered the course of a war or history. He would pick one of these lesser-known things, one of these the story behind the story. And he would talk about that and show how history has really been shaped. Well, in this segment, in this story, we need to make sure we get the story behind the story. What is going on in the Exodus? They didn't just kind of pop up in Egypt. This was all God's plan. It's his meticulous, his detailed, his exact plan. Okay? As R.C. Sproul has been often quoted as saying, there is not one maverick molecule on planet Earth. Okay? It's all lining up. It's all going according to plan. God's meticulous plan. It's detailed. In reality, it's perfect. It's perfect. Let's think about kind of how we got here. How did we get to Exodus? Well, Exodus follows a book. First book is... You guys aren't used to talking in church. I know. It's okay. First book, of course, is Genesis. Genesis, right? Genesis, the book of beginnings, tells us how we got here. All right, Genesis 1 and 2. God creates a place, and the place, God called it good. It was good 7 different times. At the end of that, he creates Adam and Eve, puts them there, and he says it's very good. Okay? God creates a place, it's good. Genesis 1 and 2, things are rolling along, and God commissions Adam and Eve in the garden, go do my purposes, work the garden, be fruitful, multiply, and there was to be an expanding reality to the Garden of Eden, and we're off to a pretty good start. Okay? Plot twist, key the minor music, bad things happen in Genesis 3. Okay? Bad things happen, the serpent comes, deceives the woman, deceives Adam. They take the fruit, they eat it, they disobey. Okay? There's 2 things that happened on that day. 1, they were no longer to be able to be in the presence of God. And 2, they were now classified as sinners. They now had sin. The presence of God and the law of God had been broken. The presence of God was no longer with them. So what are they forced to do? They're forced to go outside the garden. But, when God's delivering that curse in Genesis 3, and he says, this is what it's going to be like now. You're going to have to work hard. You're going to sweat. There's going to be thorns that grow up where you want grass to grow. Does anybody else have that testimony? Amen. Thank you. Count on Richard Atwell. Yeah, whenever I cut the grass, I always think about Genesis 3. It's like Romans 7 of my yard. The things I want to grow do not grow. The things I don't want to grow, grow. And I seriously don't know the last time I cut the grass without thinking of Genesis 3. It's a very spiritual thing for me. And life gets hard. It gets complicated. The world no longer cooperates. It's broken. It's bent. And Paul would tell us later in Romans 8 that the world has been subjected to futility in hope. Why has this been done? Because God's up to something. Okay? The world's been subjected to futility. And some of us would want to say, by Satan. Satan doesn't do things in hope. God subjected it in hope. Why? Paul would tell us in Romans 8. Why? Because it's producing something wonderful. These are birth pains. Okay? This is the process of producing something great. So let me tie this big story together. Genesis 1 and 2, God creates a great place. The place gets messed up by the presence of sin. It gets hard. It's difficult. The presence of God is now restricted. And the law of God has been broken. There's a problem. Man is separated from God. He's not in harmony. The shalom is no longer in place. It's broken. It's messed up. It's like an engine that's just out of time and not running properly. But all of that God is orchestrating and using to bring about something good in the end. That's why Paul says the present troubles, the distress, the persecution, all these things that have happened to me, it's not worthy to be compared to the glory. Okay? So here's the thing. God's going to make it right. God's going to make it right one day. And so where do we find ourselves? Find ourselves right here in the middle of the birth pains. That's where we are. And your perspective on your life will change drastically when you realize it's not just a pain in the neck, it's birth pains. Okay? This is moving us to something. So that's where we are. Okay? Genesis 3, this story takes a twist. God's plan is now, it's still on track though, after this dramatic plot twist. Genesis 3:15, along with this curse, we get hope. Along with this, life's going to be hard, he says, but one day, the seed of the woman is going to crush the head of the serpent. Okay? One day, God's going to win in the end, and we still wait for that ultimate day where the full realization of that victory is seen. Okay? After this happens, the book of Genesis is basically a book of beginnings. God's showing himself to people. He makes this promise to Adam. He makes this promise to Noah. We see the deliverance happen in Noah. And then we see he makes this promise to this pagan out of nowhere named Abram. And he makes this promise to Abram and says, I've got something for you. You are going to be my guy. I'm making a covenant with you. And through you, all the people of the earth will be blessed. Genesis 12, Genesis 15 talk about this covenant that was made with Abraham. God tells him he'll bless him. And get this, in Genesis 15, I'll just read these few verses for you. You're welcome to turn there if you like, but I'm just going to read them and we'll move on. Genesis 15, God gives Abraham a little bit of insight into how this plan is going to take place, okay? This is extremely important. Then the Lord said to Abram, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age. And they shall come back here in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. Okay? So here's the story. God makes a promise to Abraham. Says, your descendants are going to leave the land. They're going to leave the place that you are. They're going to go to a land. They're going to sojourn to a land that's not theirs. And then they're going to get stuck there for a while. And then when the wickedness of the Amorites is complete, when it's time, they're going to come back in the conquest of the land, and they're going to clean house. Okay? That's what they're going to do. This was a known fact to these patriarchs, that they were going to leave and that they were going to come back. It's not a shocker to them. So the story keeps going, and you're familiar with the basic framework, I'm sure. Jacob would come. Jacob would have 12 sons, one of which was named Joseph, after Isaac, of course. And Jacob, who would later have his name changed to Israel, he has this boy named Joseph. Now, Joseph was the youngest of a bunch of big brothers, and Joseph gets this vision, and he says to his big brothers, anybody got a big brother? Yeah, he goes to his big brothers and says, hey, God gave me this vision. This is neat. You guys are going to love it. You are all going to bow down to me. How do you think that went over? As expected. Didn't go over well. We don't get a lot of detail into the narrative, but obviously that didn't go well. Joseph's brothers decide, we're tired of him. We've had enough. He's daddy's favorite anyways. We're just going to eliminate him. And so they decide to leave him in a big pit. One of them has compassion on him, says, no, let's don't do that. Let's sell him as a slave. And so, you know the story. They decide to sell him as a slave. And then he would make his way to Egypt, receive promotion after promotion after promotion. God would bless him. God would be with him. God would honor him. And then Joseph was eventually the one who would deliver his dad and his brothers as they would move to Egypt, because he had the wisdom and the foresight through this vision from God to store up grain so that they survived the famine. So what's going on here? God is working a meticulous plan. God is working a plan so detailed that you and I just can't even fathom it. Some of you have jobs, and your job is to calculate variables, to calculate complex systems of if we do this, then this is going to happen. And your job is to figure out what gets pushed out of the circle when you make a decision. And all of us have to make those decisions at some level, and some of you probably at a different level. But we could go back and play the what-if game, okay? What if they had just left Joseph in the hole? Right? What would have happened? What would have happened? What if Joseph had just not found it in his heart to forgive them? What would have happened? What if Joseph had just decided, they're bigger than me. I'm not going to tell them about this dream. I'm just going to see how it comes true. What if he had decided to do that? What if Jacob had just not made that coat for him and they wouldn't have been all jealous and angry at him anyways? What if? But the reality is, it's what it is. And God has worked all these things out. I don't want to sound too mystical by making this statement, but let me just say this morning. You're not here by accident. Oh, I know you had to find your car keys and get in and come. But let me just say, you're here by divine appointment. You live in Mobile by divine appointment. You're in the condition you're in by divine appointment. God is at work. He is meticulously working out his plan, and he has never once been sitting in heaven watching something unfold and saying, Plan B, Michael, what do you think? It's never happened. He's never called a council meeting and had like an emergency plan that had to kick into place. God is on his throne, and he's in charge. And we see this happen through the book of Genesis into the book of Exodus. We see that God's plan just can't be thwarted. It just can't be stopped. And God uses all sorts of interesting means to accomplish his plans. You may not get the vision like Moses got. In fact, you won't. You may not have that sort of divine reassurance. But please know this, the same God who worked all those things is also working your life. And our job now is to trust him and to know him and to be faithful in the situations that we're in. Sometimes we make it harder than that, don't we? God doesn't need help with strategy. Just be faithful. Be faithful where you are. Your life situation is not taking God by surprise. Let's jump. I want to read a couple of verses from the end of the book of Genesis, and then that will lead us into the book of Exodus. And if you get nothing else this morning, I really hope that you will see that you'll get the picture that these things all tie together. Okay, it's not just a bunch of random stories that we kind of pull a moral lesson here and there from. These are stories. It's the story of God and his glory, and that's what I want you to see this morning. Okay, Joseph is old at this point. He's in Egypt. Look at Genesis chapter 50 and verse 20. He says this, "As for you," this is a great verse. You need to underline this one. "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones." Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Okay, he says, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Then in verse 22, the conclusion of the book of Genesis, "So Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. Joseph lived 110 years, and Joseph saw Ephraim's children in the third generation." Okay, pause. Do you remember something from Genesis 15? What generation was going to go back? Fourth generation, right? Okay, that's key. That's key. These little markers. "The children also of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were counted as Joseph's own. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land, to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt." Okay? So Joseph ends his life with this anticipation of leaving Egypt. You will leave Egypt. God's going to raise somebody up, and he's going to bring you out. Now, it would be some years later, but he knows that this is going to happen. Okay? So Genesis ends with the anticipation of a leaving of Egypt. So it's appropriate that our next book of the Bible is what? Exodus. It's time to go. Genesis told us it was going to be time to go. Now it's time to go. So we start in chapter 1 of verse 1. It says, "These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt." Okay, so he begins giving this list of names. Now, for us as Westerners sitting here, 3,500 years or so later, we sometimes come to these passages that just have a list of names, and it's like somebody dropped the Tel Aviv phone book in front of us, okay? And we're just going, there's no plot here. I don't know what to do with this. But the deal is, this would have meant something to them, okay? It would have meant something to them. It would have been more like going to, say, a war memorial and going and finding one of your relatives' names on the board. Okay? When you find that name, it connected with your life. So these readers would have been familiar with this, and it all meant something. Here's another thing that Exodus is doing. It's tying these events into history. Okay? This is not a fairy tale. I can't say that enough. This really happened. It happened. It's part of the story. Okay? So the author of Exodus, Moses, is careful to tie this all back into reality, to history. Okay? Christianity is not something that just exists kind of out there floating around. And it's just, nice story, truth is truth to you. That doesn't work in Christianity. It's tied to historical events. Our faith is tied to the historicity of the work of Jesus Christ and his resurrection specifically. Paul would say that in 1 Corinthians. We'll get to that one of these years. Don't tell him. We'll get to that. But we see that if the resurrection could be historically disproven, then Christianity is bunk. It's nothing. But it can't be. All right? Paul would say, I should be pitied. Foremost among all men. I've gone through all this and it's not true. If the resurrection could be disproven. Okay, so history, it means something to be tied in with history. These things really happen. Don't give that away. Don't give that away as you're having gospel conversations with people. This is all on track. It's all on track with God, with his plans. He's raised the right people up. He's put the right people in the right place. He's caused the ground to be ready, and everything is on track. Okay, let's jump ahead a little bit in Exodus chapter 2. I want to read verses 23 through 25. And this is what we're going to do. We're just going to kind of walk through this story, reading some highlights from it. Verse 23, it said, "During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery, and they cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning. And God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people, and God knew." Okay? So the people know they're approaching the end of this time where they're going to be enslaved, and they know that God is on his throne, and they say, "God, it's time. It's time for you to work." And it says that God heard them, and he knew that this was coming. Can I just pause here and try to encourage you with this? God's plan is on track in your life. And as I look out, there's most of you, I have at least some knowledge of your life, of who you are. We all have challenges in our lives. Some of you have lost loved ones recently. Some of you have dealt with illness recently. Some of you have dealt with tragedy. All of us have our own scars that we bring with us this morning. Please know that God's plan is on track. You can trust in a good God. You can trust him. He's trustworthy. He's loving. He's kind. He's good. Is it always going to make perfect sense in your mind? No. But that's because you're not God. You're his servant, and you need to trust him. God is on his throne. Romans 8:28 isn't just a verse to win a theological argument with. It's something to be trusted. He's working all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. He really is. He really is. These things are meant to encourage us. So, how does God show his glory? Well, one, he shows his glory through his meticulous plan. He's got this thing so wired, and he is so sovereign over all of these things that he is using human agents to bring all of this to pass, and it's working perfectly. Most of us can't convince our kids to eat green beans, and God is saving the world through these human agents and bringing it all to pass. It's an amazing story in and of itself. Number two, the second way God shows us his glory is by using his imperfect servants. This has got to be one of the more encouraging realities of Scripture. God is in the business of using normal folks, okay? I take a lot of pleasure in knowing that. God is in the business of using average, ordinary people. God was in the process of bringing his people out of captivity. I've told you that they knew that this day was coming. They knew it was going to be a big deal. They knew that this was the next big thing that God was going to do in their history. They knew the Abrahamic covenant. They knew it had been reiterated to Isaac and to Jacob and to Joseph. They knew that this was coming. And then he goes and grabs this guy named Moses and says, you are going to be the man to do it. All right? Moses probably got a lump in his throat like you've never had. Me? Moses? God? I think you got the wrong number. Me? I'm going to be the guy to do this? And you see this exchange that Moses has with God. Of course, you know Moses, you know his story. He's an interesting choice. This decree is given by Pharaoh. Israel's getting too big. They say, this is a national security issue. We can't let the Israelites outnumber us. They're going to grow an army. They're going to overtake us. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take out all the young boys for a while. We're going to take them out. That way they can't grow an army. And this edict is given. Well, Moses is, of course, born in that time frame when this decree is in place. So his mom takes him, makes a basket, places him in the basket, and floats him down the river. Okay? We've probably heard that story 100 times or more. If you're a mom here this morning, process that story with new eyes. Okay? You're a mom. This isn't like one of those, water floaty things that's approved by every safety organization on planet Earth. Okay? This is a homemade wicker basket that's got some tar in it. And you're trusting your baby's life in that thing, and you float it out in the river. This may be the most faith-oriented act that we read in the whole story. And they take Moses, this little baby, and they float him out into the river. It's an amazing story, isn't it? Of course, Pharaoh's daughter would find Moses, see something floating in the river. They retrieve it. It's a baby. And she says, Dad, can I keep him? And, of course, we know how the story goes. And Moses' sister was watching and ended up getting his own mother to care for him while he was a baby and nurse him. And it's just an amazing, amazing story of providence. So he would take this little baby who was preserved through the most providential means, really unusual providences of God. God would take this baby, raise him up in Pharaoh's very house, and then one day Moses would lose it because he was still a Hebrew and he had an affinity for the Hebrews. And one day he sees this abuse going on. He sees this taskmaster that's beating this Hebrew slave. It says he looks to the right, looks to the left, and he goes and takes care of business. He kills the guy, buries him in the sand, and thinks this is over. Well, it turns out that he had been seen, that his deed was known, and he was a murderer. Let's not sugarcoat this. He murdered the man out of rage. And it was a righteous anger in one sense, but he murdered him. And so he leaves Egypt thinking he's going to be killed, and he would have been had he stayed. And he goes to a place called Midian. He finds a wife, settles down in the country, and goes to live happily ever after until God shows up in a burning bush one day and says, you're not staying, buddy. You're going back. You're coming back. I got a job for you. And so he brings him back, and this story, you're familiar with it, I know. He says, Moses, you're going to be the guy. You're going to be the guy. I am Yahweh. I'm revealing myself to you in a way that was previously unknown. I am Yahweh. You're going to come, and you're going to do this. Now, here's what I want to show you on this. Moses basically says three things here. He says, I don't have the status, I don't have the authority, and I don't have the ability to do what you're asking me to do. I don't have the status, the authority, or the ability. Let's look at this. After the burning bush experience, look at 3:11. After Moses has this experience with God, the burning bush, take off your shoes, I'm going to use you, verse 11. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? God said, but I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you, that I have sent you. When you have brought the people of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. Moses, trust me, it's going to work. It's going to work. He says, God, I'm not the right guy for this. Have you ever had some ministry opportunity in front of you that looked really good, and you just thought, they're just not going to listen to me? I need a professional. I need professional help for this one. You say, that guy, he's not going to listen to me. You want me to talk to him about Christ? Seriously, God? No, not me. Not little old me. I don't speak well. I'm not the guy. Listen, God uses normal, ordinary people. I find a lot of comfort in that. God uses them. Look at how the story goes here. After God and Moses go back and forth a time or two, God tells him something that is not necessarily encouraging. Look at verse 19. But I know, this is God speaking, I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it, and after that he will let you go. So basically, here's the deal, Moses. I want you to go to the ruler of the world. I want you, the wanted guy who's left. You're a fugitive from Egypt. You've come back now. It's a new king in town. But still, that's who he was. And so I want you to go. I want you to tell them to let their slaves go, all of them. Let them go. And by the way, he's not going to listen to you. Okay? Not going to listen. Sort of like Isaiah's commission. Who will go for us? I will. Here I am. Send me. Okay, Isaiah, here's what I want you to go tell them. Isaiah 6. Go tell them this. And they're not going to listen. Isaiah says, how long? Until I lay the land desolate. Until the tree is cut down, there's nothing but a stump. There's a seed in the stump, but there's nothing but a stump that's left. That's what I want you to do. That's your commission. So, look at 4:1. This conversation continues on. So he says, I don't have the status. I'm not the right guy. Then Moses answered, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. The Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? He said, a staff. And he said, throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent. And Moses ran from it. That's funny, okay? Process that, okay? You're having a conversation with God. God says, I want you to go to the ruler of the world. He's not going to listen to you. I know you're a fugitive. I know I made you just the way that you are. He's not going to listen. And Moses says, this is just not going to work. God, I'm assessing your plan here, and you got some gaps. All right, you got some bullets that need to be filled out here. It's just not going to work. And God says, hey, Moses, what's that in your hand? He says, oh, it's just my staff. Throw it on the ground. He threw it on the ground. It becomes a snake. And what did Moses do? Same thing you would have done. Let's be honest, right? It's a snake. Run. Get out of there. Okay? So he ran from it. Look at verse 4. But the Lord said to Moses, put your hand and catch it by the tail. This is our next most faith-inducing moment in the Exodus story. Most of you would have been out at that point, right? Grab the snake, pick it back up. Really? The snake? Pick it up? So he put out his hand, and he caught it, and it became a staff again in his hand. That they may believe that the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. Again the Lord said to him, put your hand inside your cloak. And he put his hand in his cloak or his coat, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous like snow. Then God said, put your hand back in your cloak. So he put his hand back in his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. So God gives him these two miracles and says, here's how Pharaoh's going to know that you are sent by divine authority. I'm going to give you the ability to do these miracles. This is very much in keeping with some of the things that we've been studying in 1 Corinthians, that God uses these miraculous signs to validate his messenger. This is exactly what he does with Moses. He says, I'm going to give you some signs that you can do. Moses is not fully convinced, and look down at verse 11, or verse 10, rather. But Moses said to the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and tongue. He says, I'm just not a good public speaker, all right? Hey, Moses, I want you to go lead a couple million people, and I stutter. I'm not a good public speaker. What does God tell him? Verse 11. Then the Lord said to him, who made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Moses, are you trying to educate me on your abilities? Do you think I'm unaware of your abilities? Do you think I don't know these things? Come on. Verse 12. Now therefore go, I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak. And then in verse 13, he said, Oh, my Lord, please send someone else. It's kind of the last-ditch effort. Like, okay, he's taken me out on every front. I've told him I'm not the guy. He says, you are the guy. Told him I don't really have this ability. I'm not a good public speaker. I made your mouth. I know what you're capable of. Come on, let's go. And then finally, he just says, can you just pick somebody else? I just want to stay out here and tend the sheep that are in my father-in-law's field here. I just want to stay here. I just don't want to do this ministry. It says, verse 14, Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, Is there not Aaron your brother, the Levite? This is so gracious of God. Moses appeals this one last time, and God says, I'll make you a deal. I'm going to send Aaron. Aaron is a very good speaker, and you're going to be like God to him, and he'll be like the prophet. So I'm going to speak to you. You're going to speak to him. He's going to speak to Pharaoh. So that's how they make this arrangement work. It's an amazing story that God uses a messenger like this. God uses imperfect people. You know, this is completely an aside, not inspired observation in any sense, but I did find this interesting. If you look at different studies, you know what it doesn't really matter which ones you look at. You know what two of the top fears that people have are? Public speaking and snakes. Did you know that? I mean, Moses is getting worked here, right? I mean, it's easy for us to say, Moses, it's God, just listen. It's like he's making him grab snakes and talk in front of millions of people. I mean, you know, yeah, obey the Lord, but let's cut him a little slack, right? This was a big deal. This was a big deal. And he does all this just to show that it's not about you, Moses. It's not about you. It's about me and what I can do. I am perfectly aware of your abilities. I'm perfectly aware of your history. I'm perfectly aware of that baggage that you carry around with you. I'm perfectly aware of those horrible decisions you made when you were in your teens and 20s. I'm perfectly aware of those things. And you know what? I can still use you. I can still accomplish my purposes through you. That should encourage us this morning, shouldn't it? It doesn't matter who you are. I don't know the backstory on every single person in this room, and I don't need to. I know that God is able. I know that it's His Spirit that energizes. I know that it's Him who allows ministry to be done. What's that opportunity that's in front of you? That ministry opportunity that you felt a tugging in your heart for a while that you need to pursue. What are those excuses that you've come up with for why that can't happen in your life? What are those reasons? Is that something we could work through? I'd love to speak with you about that. Who is that coworker that needs Christ that you just think, I'm just not the guy, I can't get through to them? They're so intellectual, I just can't speak that language. Or I'm intellectual and they're not. I can't really communicate in that world. Who's that neighbor? Who's that relative? Maybe you need to be a part of the third Saturday outreach that goes out from our church every third Saturday morning. Maybe you need to join with the group that's going to the assisted living homes to minister. Maybe there's something on your mind that you want to see happen and it just hasn't happened yet. What is that thing? How can we help you? How can we join your team? How can we assist you? How can we do Ephesians 4 of equipping the body for the work of the ministry? How can we put you in position? We need to think through these things. Maybe you're just kind of coasting right now. It's easy to do. It's easy to do. You're coasting. You just don't really think that God can do much with you. You don't really think there's much to do for the Lord and for the kingdom. Well, look around you. As long as there's people, there's ministry to be done. When we think of ministry in terms of people work rather than in terms of an organizational chart, then we realize ministry's never done. It's never done. We may run out of jobs, but we won't run out of people. Ministry is people work. This is a testimony that we see true in Scriptures. You remember when Jesus called his apostles? Who did he call? Fishermen, right? A bunch of fishermen, which I think fishermen are typically just a cut above the rest anyways. That's personal opinion. It's not biblical. But he calls fishermen, okay? He calls just ordinary guys. And then when Peter and John are standing before the Sanhedrin in the book of Acts after they've been arrested, they look at them and say, how are these unlearned Galileans doing this to us? Who told them these things? I'll tell you who told these things. They were working by the inspiration of the Spirit of God in their life. They were on Jesus' commission. Jeff Kinley wrote a book a couple years ago, and the title of the book is The Losers Club. Okay? The Losers Club. And the book goes through and details all these different characters of the Bible and sort of their backstory. And he goes through characters like Moses, goes through David, and he shows what we know to be true from 1 Corinthians, that it's not always the best, the brightest, the Harvard, Yale graduates that God accomplishes his purposes with. Praise God, he can use everyone. But that's not, that you don't have to be of the right pedigree for God to use you in ministry. I love what John Piper says, and I'll leave this point at this. You don't have to know a lot of things for your life to make a lasting difference in the world. But you do have to know the few great things that matter and then be willing to live for them and to die for them. The people that make a durable difference in the world are not the people who have mastered many things, but who have been mastered by a few great things. If you want your life to count, if you want the ripple effect of the pebbles you drop to become waves that reach the ends of the earth and roll on for centuries and into eternity, you don't have to have a high IQ or EQ. You don't have to have good looks or riches. You don't have to come from a fine family or a fine school. You have to know a few great, majestic, unchanging, obvious, simple, glorious things and be set on fire by them. Christ Fellowship, we don't have to know everything. But we have to know a few essential things, and we need to be set on fire by them so that it's our passion. It's what ignites us for this city. It's what ignites us for the nations to see them worshiping our great God. I want to see this happen. I want to see this happen in my life. I want to see it happen in your life. I want to see it happen in our church, that we are zealous for the Lord, for his glory, and to make his name known. God uses normal, ordinary people. Let's continue our march through this narrative just for one more moment here. Summarize what happens. Moses goes to Pharaoh, and it goes just like Moses thought it would. He goes to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, remind me again why I should listen to you. Tell you what. Since you guys got so much time that you need to go wander off to the woods for a little while to worship, obviously you don't have enough to do. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to keep the quotas the same for the brick making that you're doing right now, but we're going to stop giving you the materials that you need to do it. You're going to have to go get your own stuff. And we're keeping the quota the same. And so they start driving them and driving them and driving them. And apparently this plan of God just isn't working. It goes the wrong direction. So Moses goes back to God, says, look, This is exactly what I thought was going to happen. And God says, I've got this under control. Look at the end of chapter 5. End of chapter 5, verse 22. Then Moses turned to the Lord. He's bringing the complaint from the people. Why have you done evil to this people? Why did you ever send me? God, why did you do this? Because the situation's only gotten worse. For since I came to Pharaoh to speak your name, he has done evil to this people. You have not delivered your people at all. God, I did my part, and you're not doing your part. It's a strong prayer, isn't it? Look at chapter 6, verse 1. But the Lord said to Moses, now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh. For with a strong hand he will send them out, and with a strong hand he will drive them out of his land. For the sake of time, we're going to have to stop there, but this is what introduces the plagues. This is what introduces the strong hand of God. God will have his glory. He will get glory over his adversaries. He will get glory over the other gods of Egypt. And he will use these plagues to demonstrate, I am the one true God, and there is no rival. This morning, I don't know what situation you find yourself in. Some of this may be very new to you. Some of this is extremely familiar to some of you. Please know this, no matter what situation you find yourself in this morning, there is one true God, and he will have glory in your life. And if I could quote C.S. Lewis, he says, every man will glorify God. But it matters whether you do that like John or like Judas. You will glorify the Lord. God will receive glory from your life. The question is, will it be now that you bow the knee to him? Or will it be in eternity when every knee bows and every tongue confesses that there is only one true God? Let's pray. Lord, we are grateful for this opportunity to be in your truth. As we read the story of the Exodus, there's some parts of it that are just mysterious to us. Guys, to gain understanding, help us to apply these truths and principles to our hearts and lives. Help us to recognize there really is only one true God, and that is Yahweh God. That is the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Lord, there's so many implications and applications that flow out of these stories like this. Lord, help us to put our arms around these things and to be lit on fire by these essential truths. Forgive us, God, for living for lesser things. Forgive us, God, for being so distracted so often by so many things that just don't matter. Give us an unbending, undying passion for you and living for your truth and your glory.